Los Angeles, December 3, 2023. Mid-morning. I'm sitting in my office in a trendy part of Hollywood, looking out the window at the street below, and it feels like nothing can shake me. My career is on top, contracts with the best producers, a leading role in a new blockbuster. I live in the luxurious house I've always dreamed of, and my wife, Lena, looks like her happiness will never run out. Everything seems to be going smoothly. I don't even notice how she's slowly pulling away. I don't notice what's happening right under my nose. But it wasn't always like this. Lena and I met a few years ago, back in 2017, on the set of a show that brought me my first big roles. She was still a young actress, no famous names yet. Her innocence, energy, and smile, that's what got me. It was one of those moments where you just know, this person is the one. I believed in our story, we got married quickly, and everyone around us kept saying how lucky we were. But recently, something changed. There's this feeling I've been trying to ignore for the past few weeks. At first, it was just a slight discomfort, an odd look, a sigh she would give when I talked about my shoots or new projects. Then came that mysterious late-night phone call. She said it was an old friend, but why was she trying to hide the screen from me? All these little details should have been nothing. But I couldn't ignore them. Maybe it's just stress, you're overworked, I told myself. Yet, when I found out she was spending more and more time with my co-star from the movie, James Cross, it opened a whole new chapter in my life. James was one of those actors who, unlike me, didn't obsess over big roles. He could play anything he wanted, without worrying about being in the spotlight. He was charismatic, had thousands of fans, and seemed to change girlfriends every month. But for some reason, he started showing up around Lena more often. I couldn't understand why it bothered me so much. And why should I be worried if I trust her? But with every passing week, it got harder to stay calm. I began noticing the way Lena looked at James on set, and it wasn't a normal professional look. It was something more. But I tried to hold it together, telling myself this was all in my head, that I couldn't let myself fall into paranoia because I had so much work, so many new projects, that I couldn't afford to let anything distract me. Still, one evening, when I came home late and she wasn't there, I found her phone on the table. At first, I just stared at it. I wasn't ready to check it yet. I knew it could be the end. So, I told myself, you respect her, you're not going to do this. But something inside me pushed me to pick it up. It was like a temptation I couldn't avoid anymore. And there they were, messages. Short, but clear. I'll be waiting for you tomorrow, just like always, James had written. And I realized, I couldn't stand aside anymore. She had betrayed me, and I knew it. Now, I was faced with a choice: would I be ready to face this pain and see the truth, or would I stay in a world where everything still seemed perfect? That day, I decided I wouldn't close my eyes to what was happening anymore. I remember the moment I picked up Lena's phone. I didn't want to believe it, but what I saw instantly stirred suspicion inside me. She had always been so careful with things like this, so why was she now, just like that, not hiding it from me? I scrolled through the messages again, unable to believe my eyes, and then I realized I couldn't ignore this anymore. I couldn't just close my eyes and pretend nothing had happened. She came back about an hour later. I sat in the dark, not moving, waiting for what she'd say. As usual, she walked in, not suspecting I already knew. Her scent, the perfume I used to love so much, was stronger than usual. She seemed agitated, like she was trying to hide some invisible emotion. I just watched her, trying to find some kind of answer in her eyes, though I no longer believed in their honesty. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice coming out cold, even to myself. She seemed surprised, but quickly shifted her gaze. "Filming. You know. James was there, helping out if needed." That was her standard response. I noticed her eyes drop. She hid behind those words, like they should explain everything. But I couldn't fool myself anymore. I stepped closer to her. "You know, Lena, I'm not an idiot," I said, trying to keep my calm. "You and James. I saw the messages you two exchanged." There was a flash of fear in her eyes, a look I recognized immediately. It was purely instinctive, defensive, like a person caught red-handed. She tried to turn away, but I wouldn't let her. "What was that, Lena?" I heard my voice tremble slightly. "What are you doing with him?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, silent, eyes lowered. I saw her lips tighten involuntarily, like she was holding back a storm that was about to break. We're just friends. James, he's always been around on set. You know, he really helped me with my role," she started, but I could hear the nervousness creeping into her words. It was a defense, but one so unnatural that even I began to question her sincerity. "Friends? Seriously?" I couldn't hold it in anymore. "This is more than just the time you're spending together, Lena. You're not hiding it anymore." She looked at me again, her eyes darker now. She knew I understood. And yet, instead of apologizing or explaining, she simply turned away. And that's when I realized, she didn't want to lie to me directly anymore. There was a wall between us now. "What do you want to hear?" Her voice had become cold and harsh. "Is it true?" "Yes, I'm spending more time with James. We work together, but it's not what you think." I felt my heart tighten. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a fact. And we were no longer a team. She was doing this, and I was too weak to stop her. That night, we didn't talk anymore. She went to the bedroom, and I stayed in the living room, where only one light was on. I sat there, thinking. I didn't know how to react, how to fix this. I didn't want to lose her. But at the same time, I felt the ground beneath me start to crumble. I couldn't let this go. A couple of days after that, I started following Lena. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. I set things up so I could find out where she went after filming when I wouldn't be around. And one day, I got the proof that stunned me. Lena and James met for lunch at a cafe, and it wasn't just a casual work meeting. They were laughing, clinking wine glasses, looking at each other again and again with that same look I'd only ever seen in movies. That was the line they crossed, and now I couldn't back away. From the moment I saw them together, it felt like my world had flipped upside down. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation. How did it happen? How did we get here? Lena and I had always been a team, that's what I believed. Maybe it was just a small moment of weakness on her part. But every time I looked at her phone, every time I saw that look in her eyes, I doubted that more and more. That day, I started planning my next steps. I could have just left her, confronted her about everything, but I decided to gather more information first. I had to be careful, even if I didn't like it. I was an actor, and that meant I couldn't afford to act on emotions. My main goal was simple: collect the facts so I'd have no doubts. That way, when the time came, I could put it all to rest. I began following Lena and James. I was careful about it at first. The first few times I tried to track them, I felt like a paranoid fool. But then I started noticing things. They were meeting more often than I'd ever imagined. I found them at lunch in a cafe downtown, then in a park, then somewhere else, and each time, they seemed to be getting closer. They weren't just talking, they were laughing, sharing intimate moments. One day, when I'd gathered enough material, I couldn't hold back anymore. She came home early in the morning, later than usual. I was sitting in her favorite chair, reading a script for the next scene, when she walked in. She had that nervous look again, but this time I noticed something else: she wasn't alone. There was the familiar scent of her perfume in the room, but it was mixed with something else, another cologne, a man's scent I couldn't forget. It was James's. "Where have you been?" I asked, my voice a little colder than usual. She tried to dodge the question, as always. "Sorry, I got held up on set." But I didn't let her avoid it. I stood up, walked over to her, and took her hand. "Lena, I don't need any more excuses. I've seen it all. I know what you're doing." She pulled away, and I saw her eyes flicker. This was the moment where she couldn't keep up the calm facade anymore. I could feel the crack growing between us. "What do you want me to say, Clay?" Her voice trembled, broken. "The truth," I answered, but my words felt hollow. I wasn't ready for the next wave of truth to come crashing down. I just stood there, staring at her, unable to understand why it hurt so much. She sighed deeply, then spoke, trying to find the words to soothe the situation. "It's not what you think. It's hard to explain. I saw you laughing together in that cafe, Lena. I saw him holding your hand," I said, and my voice turned bitter and cold. For the first time in a long while, she lifted her head, and her gaze was sharp, like a knife. "I shouldn't have to explain myself to you. You never listened to me. You were always too busy with your projects, your shoots." I started to feel unnecessary. Her words hit me harder than I could have expected. She wasn't accusing me of being a bad husband, she was telling me she had felt alone, that her heart had started to turn to someone else. James had been her support, her comfort in moments when I was distant. A storm of emotions swept over me. First, there was anger, then fear. I felt my hands start to shake. This wasn't just a physical betrayal, it was a betrayal of trust. I couldn't figure out what to do. I still loved her, but was that enough? Could I forgive what she'd done, or had she already spent all of my chances? "You don't know what you're saying," I whispered, but I realized those words didn't matter anymore. She and James had something I hadn't been able to give her, emotional closeness, something I'd forgotten in my chase for success. That night, I didn't give her a chance to explain. I didn't know why I reacted the way I did, but when she tried to apologize, I couldn't stop myself anymore. "This is it, Lena. We can't keep doing this." She was silent. Lena just stood there in front of me, her face expressing something between despair and anger. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. This was the same look I'd seen before, when she was hiding something. But now, it was the look of someone who didn't know how to untangle the mess they'd created. "Clay, I don't know what happened," she finally broke the silence, but her voice sounded empty. "I didn't want this. I don't know how it got to this point." I could feel my patience evaporating, the last drop slipping away. Her words felt so cliché, and I couldn't listen to them anymore. "Don't," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've already made your decision. And so have I." She took a few steps back, as if trying to distance herself from me, and I realized, this was the moment. Everything I knew, all our years together, everything I'd worked for, seemed to crumble into a sandstorm. I turned to the window. I had nothing left to say to her, but even in the emptiness that had formed between us, I felt an overwhelming need to know more. More about what had really happened. More about James, about her feelings. My clarity and control had completely disappeared, and I couldn't leave this unanswered. That night, I gathered all my resolve and drove to the studio. I had to talk to James. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had to do it. He needed to be confronted as well. I got into my car and headed to the other side of town, where most of the filming took place. I reached the studio late in the evening, after most people had gone home. But I knew James often stayed late after shoots, working on new scenes. The silence of the night city surrounded me, and I felt a strange, uncomfortable sensation that I had just made the worst decision of my life. But it was too late to turn back now. When I walked into the studio, I saw him. James was standing by the monitor, reviewing another take. He didn't notice me at first, and I watched him for a moment. He looked so calm, so composed, so confident. How could he be so sure of himself? How could he live like this, as if he wasn't breaking any rules? I approached him quietly. My footsteps echoed in the loud studio like gunshots in the silence. "James," I said, his name coming out cold but clear. He looked up, surprised at first, then his eyes focused, like he already knew this moment was inevitable. "What are you doing here, Clay?" he asked, smiling slightly. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the look of someone who already knew what I was about to say. "You know why I'm here," I replied, stepping closer. "I want the truth." He leaned back in his chair, never breaking eye contact. His reaction was like someone who had long since accepted this as part of the game. "The truth? Well, fine. I'm going to assume Lena already gave you her version. You want to hear mine?" I didn't expect him to be so calm. That threw me off balance. My anger started to boil, but I gathered myself. The few seconds after his words felt like an eternity. I stood there in front of James, trying to make sense of what he was trying to say. His words hit me like a heavy blow, something I couldn't have predicted even in my worst nightmares. "What do you mean?" My voice barely broke through the fog that had consumed my mind. I could feel my heart racing faster, my blood boiling in my chest, pulsating with heat. This wasn't just betrayal. This was some kind of game, and it was taking me to a new level of uncertainty. James smiled, again, but this time it wasn't the same confident grin I'd seen earlier. It was more like the smile of a predator who knew the prey was already in its grasp. He looked me straight in the eye, as though checking if I was ready for what was coming next. "Clay, don't think I don't see what you're doing. You feel something's wrong, and now you want to regain control. But the truth is, you don't even know what's really happening." His voice became deeper, more ominous, like someone who had long stopped pretending to keep their emotions in check. "You're not the only one who's been betrayed, like you think. Lena, she wasn't the only one breaking our agreements." I didn't understand what he meant, and my heart skipped a beat in nervous anticipation. "What are you talking about?" I repeated, trying not to let my voice betray my inner unease. James stepped closer, like he wasn't afraid of my reaction anymore, and there was something sinister in his tone now. "You've been so consumed by your career that you didn't notice how your closest friends were betraying you too. James Cross is just part of your reality, Clay. But do you really want to hear the truth?" I couldn't believe my ears. My eyes locked on his face, but he kept speaking. "You think Lena fell for me because of my success, that I was just the replacement? That's not it. My role in her life was temporary. And you still don't know who's really behind all of this." I began to realize that James was trying to confuse me even more, but I couldn't stop myself from listening. I was desperately trying to piece together any logical thread in what he was saying. "I don't understand. Who else? What do you mean?" I asked, my voice laced with not only anger but helplessness. He paused, then sighed deeply, as if he needed to do this to continue his game. "You've been headed toward this for a while, Clay. But now you'll see. You think this is just a story about you and Lena? But in reality, you're just one of many who got caught in the trap. And if you want to understand why she changed, you need to see the bigger picture." I stood there, unable to move. He was looking at me, and I was starting to feel that this was something bigger than just a simple betrayal. Something that couldn't be confined to just one person or one situation. It was like a tangled web, where every move only made me more entangled. "You want the truth?" he asked again, and there was a quiet mockery in his voice now. "Your friend, your colleague, Peter, he's got his part in this game. And not just him. I recoiled as if struck by lightning. Peter? My longtime friend, the one I'd started in the industry with, the one with whom I'd shared all the highs and lows of Hollywood? How could he be involved in all of this? I don't believe it, I whispered, but my words sounded unsure, because deep inside, I felt that it might actually be true. James just smiled, and I saw how much he enjoyed watching me break down. He really was a predator, feeding off my weakness. You want to know how all this started, Clay? You know why Lena came to me? Because she was already so disappointed with you. Because you weren't her support anymore, and Peter. Peter became her friend, and then, more. And you didn't notice. It was like thunderstruck. Peter, he wasn't just a friend. He was part of this dark game, part of a conspiracy I couldn't have imagined. I was in shock, but something inside me told me this wasn't the end. There was still more to the story, more I didn't know, but that was waiting for me in the future. James understood that, and that's why he said, "Now you know why everything happened the way it did. You don't want to face it, but sometimes the truth is the last thing you want to know." We stood there, and I felt the weight of this truth grow heavier and heavier. But I couldn't stop now. I had to know more. And now I understood, the next encounter wouldn't be like all the others. I stood in front of James, and every word he said echoed in my head like hot metal, sinking deep into the darkest corners of my soul. Peter. My friend. I couldn't even believe it. How could he be a part of all this? How could he betray me? And with the woman I loved, the one I'd planned my future with? James noticed it all. His cold stare was like a blade, cutting deeper into my calm with every word. You want answers, Clay? You want to know why this happened? Because your idea of success, of career, of constantly chasing roles, was your biggest weakness. You became too big for yourself. And Lena saw that. His words were like poisonous venom, slowly seeping into my consciousness, dragging me deeper into the abyss. I tried to hold it together, to keep myself from breaking down, but the picture he was painting was so horrifying that I could barely restrain myself from exploding. You're right about one thing, I said, forcing my voice to sound steady, though inside I was torn apart. I wasn't there for her. I became too absorbed in my world, in my career, and I didn't notice her needs changing. But Peter. I couldn't even say his name without the pain cutting through my throat. Peter? How could he? James paused, as if waiting for me to fully comprehend everything. He was calm, and it only irritated me more. He had probably known all of this for a long time. Peter was always your friend, Clay. He's the one who was there when you needed support, when you were weak. And he found his way to Lena when you were too busy chasing your desire to be the best. Not just in acting, but in your personal life. You made yourself a stranger to her. I felt his words sting from within. I was trembling at the thought that I might have lost Lena because of my ambition. My career, my fame, my success, now they all seemed so hollow. I had been so focused on work, on achieving more, that I hadn't seen how alone she must have felt. But this, what James said about Peter, was too much. I couldn't believe that my friend, the one who I'd started out with, the one who shared all my highs and lows in Hollywood, could have done this. I started recalling moments when Peter was around, how he behaved with Lena. And now I understood, it was more than friendship. It was a complex, shadowy game that I hadn't seen. You want to see how deep this goes? James suddenly asked. I lifted my gaze, and his eyes had turned serious, even a little cold, like someone staring at their prey before making the final move. I'll tell you more. This isn't just Peter. This isn't just a betrayal with your wife. This is something bigger. This is a conspiracy. I froze. A conspiracy? I couldn't understand how all of this could be part of one plan. What do you mean? I asked, but my words seemed meaningless now. James nodded, and I saw him carefully take something small and black out of his bag, a USB drive. He placed it on the table in front of me. "This is what you need if you want to know the full truth," he said, and I felt my heart race again. There are recordings. Not just Lena and Peter. There's someone else, and this someone is more than just a friend. And they have more to do with you than you could imagine. I was stunned. What was this? I couldn't fathom who else could be involved in this mess. My mind started working overtime, trying to find some answer, but nothing concrete came to mind. "What are these recordings?" I finally said, feeling my mind whirl. "What's on them?" "You'll see for yourself," James replied, and his voice had that unmistakable certainty that I was going to follow through with this. "But know this, Clay, everything you think you know doesn't matter anymore. The true story is just beginning." I took the USB drive, feeling its coldness. My fingers clenched around it, and I realized that I was standing at the edge now. Maybe there was no going back after what I was about to see. But I couldn't stop. My heart was racing faster, and I knew the worst was yet to come. "You want to see it, Clay?" James asked, and I felt time stand still. I nodded. "Cut the sarcasm, James. This isn't about your jokes. I know what you've been doing with Lena. I know everything." He was silent for a few seconds, as if weighing his words. Then he said, "Yeah, I know what you're after. But before you decide if you're ready to hear it, there's something I should tell you." I felt the atmosphere shift in the air. Something in his voice was different, no longer self-assured, but more intimate. There was an unexpected pull to it. "You're not the person I expected to see, Clay. You know things between you and Lena haven't been right for a while now. This wasn't just betrayal, it was her choice. Didn't you notice how she's changed?" I couldn't believe what he was saying. Was this really true, or was he just trying to manipulate me? He went on. "You got too big. People are slipping away from you, but you don't see it because you're only focused on your role, on your career. You didn't talk to her, you didn't listen to her. And now you want to blame me?" I clenched my fists. His words were like a knife, cutting through everything I thought I knew. He kept throwing new facts at me, each one feeling like a betrayal of its own, and every word made my belief in everything I'd known start to crumble. Now, I was starting to question if I ever really knew Lena at all. And then, in the silence of the studio, James dropped a bombshell that froze me in place. "You want the truth? Then here it is. You're not the only one who's been betrayed." We stood there in silence, and I realized that my whole world, the picture I had built, was about to change again. I wasn't ready for what I was about to see. As I walked out of the studio, the heavy USB drive in my hand felt too much to bear. I could feel its coldness seeping into my fingers, and instinctively, I knew that with each step I took, my reality was crumbling into pieces. I couldn't remember the last time I felt this lost. All these betrayals, these secrets, these hidden stories that had kept me in the dark, they had all come together into one terrifying picture, something I couldn't have imagined, and now I couldn't turn away from it. When I got home, I immediately sat down at my computer. My hand was shaking as I plugged the USB drive into the port. All the days of fear, suspicions, and doubts now had an answer. I didn't know why this had to be so hard, but I couldn't stop. I had to see it through. The screen showed a simple file, a few videos. And they were all made up of Lena's face, Peter's, James's, and someone else's, someone I didn't recognize. I wasn't ready when the first video began to play. On the screen, Lena appeared, her face slightly puffy, as if she had been crying. She was sitting at a table in a restaurant, facing a hidden camera. Her voice was quiet, but I could hear the heaviness in it, like she was trying to keep herself together. "I don't know how much longer I can take this," her voice cracked, filled with pain. Clay. He's so distant. He's just too focused on his own world. I thought things would be different, but we drifted apart long before he even noticed. Now, I saw it clearly. She had never said anything like this to me. She was always there, always telling me we would get through everything together, that we were a team. And now, in these recordings, I saw what lay behind the wall of our fabricated happiness. Emptiness. And yet, I couldn't believe what she was saying. I don't feel like he loves me anymore, like he understands me. I forced myself to keep watching when the next file appeared. It was a video of Peter. He was standing in a dark hallway, holding the camera at chest level. His face wasn't visible, but his voice came through clearly. "You have to do this, Lena. We both know you've already made up your mind. You can't go back to Clay. He's not the man you loved anymore. You won't be able to feel what you felt in the beginning. You know that." His words were cold, devoid of emotion. And yet, I saw how Lena recoiled in the frame, unable to respond right away. She was silent. "Lena, you need to act faster. You know this is your chance. He won't change. You can't go back to what it was. Do you want this?" Now I understood. This wasn't just a betrayal from Lena. This was manipulation. And this moment, when Peter was convincing her, was one I couldn't erase from my mind. She was standing at the edge, and he was pulling her deeper into this abyss. "You need to be with us. Otherwise, we'll all lose more than just Clay. You don't want that." His words, and the underlying message, hit me like a cold shower. I tried to remember when Peter first started appearing in our group, when he became so close to Lena. I hadn't noticed. He was a friend, a colleague on set, and now it turned out he wasn't just betraying me, he was manipulating my wife. I felt a deep disgust for myself for not seeing the signs earlier. But it wasn't over yet. I clicked on the last file, and once again, a familiar face appeared, James. He was sitting in a black chair in a dark room, with only vague outlines in the background. His voice was as cold and detached as ever. "This was necessary, Clay," he said, looking into the camera, and I could feel how every word pierced through my defenses. "This isn't just an affair. This is a plan. You still don't understand why we're doing this. You and Lena. Peter. We're not doing this to break you. We're doing it so you understand there are more important things than your career. You've been living in the illusion that everything will hold together through your success, but in reality, your success is your biggest mistake." I couldn't believe my ears. What did he mean? What was this plan? He spoke like he knew how it would all end, and I was just trying to figure out how to stop it. I couldn't understand why they were making me go through this, why they had decided to manipulate my life. But now I knew, this was more than just betrayal. This was an entirely different game. And to understand why all of this happened, I had to find out who was behind this conspiracy and what they had really been hiding from me. That night, I couldn't sleep. All these recordings kept swirling in my mind. My reality, everything I thought I knew about my family, my career, was suddenly falling apart into pieces. And I understood more and more, this fight wasn't just for Lena. This was a fight for my soul. I woke up in the morning with the eerie feeling that the shadow of silence from the video still lingered in my mind. My consciousness felt torn into pieces, each one screaming the same thing: this was only the beginning. All those months of betrayal, all those suspicions, they now seemed like child's play compared to what I had just discovered. I couldn't decide what to do, but I knew one thing for sure: this dark story wasn't over. And I needed to learn more. I sat down at the computer and started replaying the files again. I didn't have clear answers to the questions James had left hanging. What was the plan? Who were these people behind this conspiracy? Why had Lena, Peter, and even James chosen me as their target? I'd seen the videos of their conversations, but all these fragments seemed empty without answers to the key questions. Over and over, I went back to the flash drive, watching every frame and listening to every word, trying to find even the smallest thread that could lead me to the truth. And then, I came across something else, another file I hadn't noticed before. It was hidden under the name *final_meeting. Despite being at the very end of the list, I couldn't ignore it. Something about that file grabbed my attention, and I felt a tightening inside me. I clicked open, and the screen flickered to black for a moment. Then, a new frame appeared, a dark room, dimly lit only by the light from a table, on which 3 figures sat. I immediately recognized Lena's face, Peter's, and James's, but there was something else, something that made me catch my breath. The third figure was hidden in the shadows, their face obscured, and I couldn't make out who it was. Their body was shielded from the camera, but the voice, that filled the room was clear, impassive, and so familiar. It was firm, calm, but with an unspoken undertone that made me clench my fists. "We all know that Clay isn't the one we need," the unfamiliar voice said. It was a male voice, not accusing, but stating a fact. "He's our weakness. We can't allow him to remain part of this game." I paused the video for a second, trying to process what I had just heard. Who was that? And why were they talking about me like I was part of some game? I clicked play again, and the voice continued. "Lena, you made the right choice, but Peter is right, Clay can't stay. If we want to finish this, he has to be removed." Those final words sounded so cold that I immediately felt a tightening in my chest. I leaned back, unable to believe my eyes. Removed? What did that even mean? This wasn't just manipulation, it sounded like a threat. A threat I couldn't ignore. Again, I started to think about everything that had been happening around me lately, Lena, Peter, James, and this new, unknown voice. It seemed like they were all working to some plan, like a puzzle I couldn't piece together. I started feeling my illusion of a world I had built fall apart. My career, my relationships, everything I thought I understood now seemed like part of a manipulation. The video continued, and I saw Lena reappear in the frame. She was calm, but her face had turned cold, like ice. "I know this is the right thing," she said. "I'm ready. Clay can't be part of our plan." I closed my eyes. It was harder than I could have imagined. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a master plan, and I was merely a pawn on a chessboard. I turned back to the computer, leaning on the desk, and for a moment, it felt like I was alone with this story. All these people were part of something I didn't fully understand. And now, I was part of it too. My heart raced, but I couldn't stop. I had to find out who that unknown voice was, figure out who was really behind this conspiracy and what they had been hiding from me. I felt something stir deep inside me. And I realized, this wasn't just a fight for my wife or my relationship. This was a fight for my life. This whole conspiracy, all these people, they had their own agenda, and I was in the way of their plan. But I couldn't let it end like this. I had to find out who was behind all of this, who was truly pulling the strings in this game. I stood up from the desk, feeling my internal gears clicking back into motion. I had to find that unknown voice, that figure in the shadows. My search had just begun. The next few days I spent completely immersed in this new reality, where I was nothing more than a pawn on a chessboard. I couldn't afford to remain passive. After everything I saw on that flash drive, I couldn't just let this be part of some manipulation, I had to act. I started searching for any clues, anything that could give me an idea of who was behind all of this. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized, this plan was meticulously crafted. I wasn't blind. All these people, James, Peter, Lena, they were playing their parts, and I was just a small piece in this massive puzzle. But who was pulling the strings? Who was manipulating them, and who, ultimately, was the mastermind behind this drama. On the day when I felt like I was on the verge of losing control, I got a call. An unknown number. I remembered everything James had told me about the plan. Could it be someone from this conspiracy? Holding my breath, I answered. Clay. The voice on the other end was muffled, familiar, but I couldn't place it. You're searching for the truth, right? But are you ready to accept it? My heart tightened, and I felt the nerves rising in my throat. Who is this? I asked. My hand was trembling, holding the phone, and I couldn't hide the anger boiling inside me. I couldn't stop. This was the answer I had been searching for, and I felt that right in this moment, everything would change. You're looking for answers, but the truth might be so bitter that you'll never forget it. The voice was cold and calm, yet something in it made my nerves snap to attention. What you find out could destroy your career, your relationships, everything you've worked for. And if you continue, it will be your last step. I've already taken that step, I heard myself say, surprised by my own resolve. Who are you, and what do you want? The voice quieted for a moment, then spoke in a whisper, like murmuring in the dark. You need to find the right person. The one who knows more than James, Peter, or Lena. You need to look for the one who sits at the very top. Only they know why this all happened. I couldn't answer, because the call abruptly ended. It was like thunder crashing in the clear sky. Who was at the top of this conspiracy? I thought back to everything I had learned, all the recordings, and the words that still didn't give me all the answers. I began digging deeper, and once again, I stumbled upon something strange, an old email from a producer I had received a while ago. The subject line was odd, joint venture, for your benefit. It sounded like a generic greeting I had overlooked before. But now, this email caught my attention. I opened it, and saw something unusual at the bottom, a signature, J.A. Andrews. My heart skipped a beat. J.A. Those initials weren't just a coincidence. This was a well-known producer who had worked on several major projects, but rumors swirled about him controlling some of the biggest deals in the industry. Few knew, but his name was synonymous with shadows and manipulation, something I had never personally encountered. And now, I realized, this man was involved in all of this. Immediately, it hit me, James, Peter, and Lena were just pawns in this game, and the producer himself could be the one pulling the strings behind every event. All this time, I had been so focused on the people I knew that I hadn't seen the bigger figure who was manipulating them all. My heart raced faster, and I felt anxiety surge through me. I slowly lifted my gaze to the computer screen, realizing that now my goal was clear. I had to meet this person. This was my only chance to find out why I was part of this game, why Lena, Peter, and even James had become my enemies. I headed to the location specified in the email. It was an old, slightly run-down hotel on the outskirts of town, a place where filmmakers had often gathered for negotiations. Now, as I entered, each step felt like crossing into another reality. The hotel was a foggy, dark place, everything seeming abandoned, even though just recently major business deals had taken place here. I walked down corridors that smelled of absence, and entered one of the rooms mentioned in the letter. And there he was, J.A. Andrews stood by the window, not turning toward me when I entered. "You've finally come," his voice was calm, yet it carried an unmistakable authority. "Are you ready to learn the truth, Clay?" His voice, calm and confident, like someone who had long since mastered the art of manipulation, pulled me to my feet. I took a few steps toward him, trying to hold my emotions in check. J.A. Andrews, I stood before him, and fear gripped me. Not just because I had finally discovered who was behind all these games, but because I still didn't understand what was waiting for me ahead. He slowly turned to face me, and I saw his face, a faint smile on his lips, but his eyes held neither joy nor anger. It was pure indifference. Like a person who had long since stopped caring about what was happening around them. "I know you've come here with a bunch of questions, Clay," he said, sizing me up like I was just another piece in his plan. "You want to know who I am, why I'm doing all of this, why your wife and your closest people have become your enemies. Well, I'm ready to give you your answers." I stood there, unable to respond, though inside I was boiling. I still didn't understand how all of this was connected. How had it all become so huge and complicated? I had blindly walked down this path for so long that now I couldn't make sense of why everything I thought I knew about my life now felt like a lie. "You're part of a bigger game, Clay," he continued, his words like a cold strike. "But your career, your family, they don't have a place in this world anymore. You've become too famous, too powerful. And when you become too big, it means you become a threat to those who control things behind the scenes." "What processes are you talking about?" I finally managed to answer. My anger began to outweigh the fear. I was here now, and I wasn't backing down. I needed to know who this man was, and why he had decided my life was part of his game. "You don't understand," he replied with a touch of disappointment, as if I were a child who couldn't grasp simple truths. "You were a useful tool. You created the image of the perfect husband, the perfect actor, and now you've become exactly what we needed. But your value is up. You've gone from being a player in the game to a threat." I felt something inside me crack. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my career, my relationships, everything had been part of a massive manipulation. I wasn't who I thought I was. I was just a tool, used by people I didn't even know. Jay Andrews walked over to the table where a glass of water sat, and poured himself a bit. I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. This man was so calm, so careful, and everything he said seemed so obvious, but I couldn't accept it. "You've become part of a massive scheme, Clay," he continued, his tone growing more ominous. "Lena was just the beginning. Peter, he played his part too. But they weren't the main target. You, Clay, became the key player, because with your fame and success, we could control more people. We gathered all the threads, brought you to this point, and now you need to understand that you can't just walk away from this." I could feel everything inside me crumbling. All these people I thought were part of my life, Lena, Peter, James, they were just pawns. And I was a pawn in someone else's game. But why? Why did this happen to me? "You can't just walk away from this game, Clay," he said, instead of answering. "You're part of the system now. And if you try to take one step back, if you try to take your life back, they will destroy you." I stayed silent. I stood there, listening to every word, and realizing that I couldn't turn back now. This whole story, this dark intrigue, was far deeper than I had imagined. And now I was at its center, with no way out. Jay Andrews took a step closer to me, and his gaze became even sharper. "Now you know, Clay. And it's not what you want to hear. But there's one thing you need to understand to the very end. We're not just playing with you. We're not just destroying your life. We're building something much bigger. And if you want to live, you need to choose a side." "I won't be your puppet," I said, filled with determination, though my internal battle was far from over. I could feel every part of me fighting to break free from this trap. "You already chose, Clay," he replied with a shadow of a smile. "You've already become part of this world. Now just accept it, you can't escape it." He didn't say anything more, but I already knew, I was standing on the edge of what might be my final battle. My head throbbed with the terrifying words I just heard from J.A. Andrews. He spoke about me, about my place in this game, like I was just a cog in a machine that could be easily replaced. I felt anxiety fill me, but also a desperate determination. I couldn't let them destroy my life like this. I couldn't be their puppet, I couldn't let it all end the way they planned. I still had a chance, although a slim one. I had to learn more about who was behind this game and, more importantly, how to get out of it. But how could I break this cycle when every move I made seemed to be controlled? I no longer had my old friends. Lena, Peter, James, all of them were part of this conspiracy, and I seemed to be the only one who didn't know my final role in this story. The next few days passed in a fog. I started to follow them, trying to gather any evidence that could help me understand their endgame. But every time I got closer to the truth, it seemed to retreat further away, like a shadow. I understood I couldn't avoid the climax. I couldn't let them use me anymore, and I couldn't let them convince me that I was already trapped. Then, one evening, when I was starting to believe this was all part of their plan, I learned that Lena and James were meeting at a private party hosted by none other than J.A. Andrews himself. The party was for the wrap-up of one of the big projects I had been working on, and I knew everyone would be there, from directors to actors to producers. But somehow, I felt that this wasn't just any party. I knew they would be there. And I couldn't miss this. I received an invitation to the event, although J.A. Andrews had specifically promised that the meeting would be intimate, only for the closest people. At that moment, I realized, this wasn't just a chance for them to celebrate. This was their trap, where everything was under their control. And I had to be there, even if it meant witnessing the destruction of everything I had once believed in. The evening started off normally, music, conversations, glasses of wine, laughter, but everything felt unnatural to me. I didn't feel like I belonged. I was beginning to understand that this place had become the stage for another manipulation, and I couldn't afford to miss it. That night, I saw James and Lena standing aside, deep in conversation. Their gazes were so intense that I couldn't look at them without feeling like I was witnessing something far more than a casual exchange. I moved closer, trying to remain unnoticed. My eyes locked onto every movement, every gesture. And that's when I saw it, the thing I had been so afraid of. Lena touched James's shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but her gaze. It was filled with something I couldn't quite put into words. She was completely absorbed in him. And this was more than just friendship. This was passion. As I watched from a distance, my heart constricted with pain. They hadn't just crossed the line of trust. They were caught in that tangled web of emotions I couldn't even explain. I tried to avoid this truth, but I couldn't. I saw James lean in to whisper something in her ear. Lena smiled, and it wasn't the friendly smile I was used to seeing. What happened next became the final straw for me. They walked away from the crowd, and I couldn't hold back anymore. I approached their table, trying not to draw attention, but I saw them exchange a quiet look. And then, without warning, she kissed him. It wasn't just a kiss of gratitude or farewell. This was a real kiss, full of emotions I shouldn't have been witnessing. I felt my heart nearly tear in two. This was what I had feared the most, that they were together, and I was standing on the outside, blind to it all. In that moment, when I witnessed that kiss, I understood. I could no longer stay in the shadows. This betrayal wasn't just between Lena and James, it was part of a larger game, one where I had become nothing more than a tool. I stepped back, feeling every part of my being crumble. I wasn't prepared for what I had seen, but now I knew for sure, my role in this game wasn't accidental. They knew I was watching. And now, after witnessing this kiss, I understood, there was no turning back. I had to go all the way. To do that, I would have to enter the game I had tried so hard to avoid. But now I knew, I would play by my own rules. When I saw them, Lena and James, their kisses and glances, everything around me started to spin. I could no longer lie to myself, I couldn't continue living in illusions. They were together. I was just another element they were manipulating. The betrayal that I had refused to accept for so long was now a brutal, undeniable truth. My career, my life, my relationships, everything was part of a bigger plan in which I had no place. I don't know how long it took after that moment when I decided to act. A wave of complete despair overwhelmed me, like a tide. I had nothing left but this truth. I wasn't just betrayed, I was used. But this wasn't the end. Now that I had seen Lena and James betray me right in front of my eyes, I knew I still had a chance to turn the game around. My role was still not finished. I left the party, not wanting to witness any more. And as I was leaving, I found a new message on my phone. It was from J.A. Andrews. The same man who had become the center of this horrific game. I couldn't help but open it. You've seen everything you needed to, Clay. Now you have a choice, either you keep playing, or you destroy everything, including yourself. Your choice. But remember, we always control the ending. Those words seemed to confirm what I already knew. This wasn't just a game. It was manipulation, a system where people with all the strings held the power. I realized that, to stop it, I had to learn more. I couldn't let it end like this. I had to find out who was behind their manipulations and why they chose me. I had only one path left. I had to go back to J.A. Andrews, to this dark producer, and find out how this conspiracy had become my life. A few days later, when the emotions had started to subside, I found myself at the same hotel where I had met J.A. Andrews. This time, I was ready. I knew that my life wouldn't make sense until I learned the full truth. I was at the edge, but now that didn't matter. I had to decide whether I would continue to be part of this cursed plan, or if I would fight until the end. I entered the room, and there he was, standing by the window, as he had before, calm, emotionless. I no longer feared him, no longer felt afraid. This was the final step. I was preparing for this. Clay, he turned toward me and looked at me coldly, but with a certain understanding in his gaze. You've come to learn more, haven't you? You want to know why we did this to you, why all of this happened. I nodded, not saying a word. You were needed for one simple task, he began, carefully choosing his words. You are our perfect image, Clay. You're not just an actor. You are a symbol of success, of everything people strive for but never reach. You became the ideal representation of a life that we wanted. And that was our chance. I stayed silent, trying to understand where he was going with this. We gave you the role, we gave you the fame, we gave you the career. You became popular, admired by people. And all of this was part of a big experiment. You are not just an actor, you are a product. You are an image we created to control others. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was unreal. This wasn't just about money or betrayal, it was so much more. I was part of a system where people didn't matter, ideas, images, manipulations were the real currency. I was nothing more than a piece in their vast plan. Lena and James? They're part of this plan too? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Yes, J. Andrews replied without hesitation. Lena is the key part. She's what we use to keep you in the game. James, he was necessary to create the illusion of competition. They're all working for us. You were just part of the puzzle. Now I understood why they had acted the way they had. They weren't just betrayers. They were part of a much bigger plan. I was part of this plan, and I could no longer just stand by. I had made my choice, and it was obvious. I felt my heart grow heavy with the weight of his words. All this time, I thought I was fighting for my love, for my relationships. But now, hearing it from the mastermind behind this game, I realized, I was no longer who I thought I was. I was part of the machine they had created. I lived in their world, but I could no longer stay there. Well done, Clay, J. Andrews said, seeing that I had accepted the truth. Now you know that the game isn't over. You can't just walk away from it. I lifted my head and looked him straight in the eye. I'm no longer part of this game, I said coldly. I'll find a way to stop all of this. But he only smiled, like a predator waiting for its prey. "Not so fast, Clay," he whispered. "You've forgotten one thing. There's another player in this game. And he's much stronger than you." This was the end, but also the beginning of something new. I realized that the real battle was just starting. Jay Andrews, Lena, James, they were all part of the larger conspiracy. And now, when I saw what had been hidden behind my relationships, my life, I was ready for the fight. I left the room, feeling that the further I went, the closer I was to the moment when I could take control again. Betrayal was just the beginning, and the real battle for my freedom was still ahead. I would do everything I could to destroy this system and free myself from its grip. This was my final battle. And I wouldn't back down.